right, everyone. So it's exactly 11:15. So I figure we'll get started on time and get you out of here to your lunch trek down to LA Live. I want to thank everyone for being here, not only at the conference, but here in this workshop today. I'm teaching 2 workshops today. This one's on storytelling for business, which I love teaching this. This is going to be a shortened version of a workshop I do with my clients. And just a little bit of a warning, I guess it would be, we're going to be talking to each other in this workshop. Because storytelling is this thing that you do, not just something that you listen to someone stand up on stage and talk about. All right? So if you're sitting by yourself, try to find yourself over to someone else that you may be able to partner with today, because we're going to be doing some exercises. That's kind of how we practice and get better at storytelling. All right. So, let's kick it off. My name is Dave Collins, and I'm the founder and CEO of Oak and Reads. It's a consultancy where we do interactive trainings on all sorts of different soft skills with a variety of clients. So these are a lot of the different clients I work with. The point of this slide is for you to go ooh and ah, but also more importantly, it's to show you that no matter what industry you work in, this type of skill, these type of soft skills, specifically around storytelling, it's going to be useful. It's something that you can use as a tool, whether you work in advertising, technology, construction, and literally in the federal government, in the state government, local government, in schools, whatever you're doing, the ability to tell stories really well and to tell stories to prove a point is a tool that we all can get better at. So the name of my business is actually called Oak and Reads, and it's the name of an Aesop's fable. Has anyone here heard of this Aesop's fable? Yeah, almost never anyone does. It's kind of on the B-sides of Aesop's Fables discography. So the reason I named my business this, one, is because I really love the message, the moral behind it, and 2 is because the URL was available. So I went with it and moved on. So the story is this, the quick version is this. There's a big tall oak tree standing by the side of a river, and the oak tree is talking to a bunch of reeds, some small grasses. And the oak tree is saying, look at me, I'm so big and strong. I've got these big branches, this strong trunk, these deep roots. I'm amazing, and you're just a bunch of flimsy reeds. I can't imagine how you've survived this long. Of course, this is an Aesop's fable, so something bad has to happen. And overnight, there's a big storm with lots of wind, and the wind rips the oak tree out from its roots, snaps it in half, and kills it instantly. Of course, the reeds survive because they're flexible. Every time there's a breeze, they blow over, and they pop right back up. So I love this message of flexibility. Regardless of what industry you're in, there are going to be those storms, those winds, those things that you cannot expect and that are going to happen, and you need to be able to respond to that. And that's why at our company, we do a lot of work with improvisation. So we use the tools of improvisation for the theater as a way to teach people how to be improvisational and flexible when they're at work with their coworkers. So I know that often freaks people out. Don't worry, I'm not going to have anyone come up here and do scenes or anything like that. I love doing that, but that's not what today is about. Today is just about storytelling. We only have a short period of time. So we're just going to use some tools from improvisation. We're actually going to bring in some research in the neuroscience of storytelling as well, and they're going to give you a really simple, straightforward framework to help you tell better stories. Does that sound good? Great. Okay, so why tell stories? It's sort of an open question to you. Does anyone have an understanding or an idea of why a story might be a useful thing to use in a business context? Maybe specifically in HR. Yeah, I see a hand over there. Yell it out.
Maybe to engage more?
Yeah, to engage more. That's a great reason, to get more attention. Yeah, another hand over there.
Examples?
Yeah, to give examples, to illustrate examples. Yeah, I'll take a couple more. Here. Yes, people remember the information better if it's in a story. Yeah, we're going to talk exactly about that. Yeah, right here.
Similar to engagement with connection, I think.
Yeah, establishing a connection with a person. 2 things right there. It's like you've read my slide on neuroscience already. It's perfect. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
Entertaining and keep it from being boring.
Yes, entertain people, keep them from being bored. I mean, it's so easy to fall asleep in a meeting when you're just droning through PowerPoint slides. If you can tell a story that still makes your point, it's going to stick in the minds much more easily. Yeah, one more hand. I saw one right there. Yeah.
Believable.
Believable. Yeah. What do you mean by believable?
They can relate to it. They want the information and they're more receptive.
Yeah, you want to empathize, you want to believe it, you want to kind of put yourself in their shoes. These are all reasons why storytelling is a great tool. So what I'm going to do right now is give you 5 best practices or 5 ways that you can tell stories better. And that's just what we're going to jump into right now. So the first one is thinking about where do good stories come from. So what you want to do when you're trying to come up with a good story that you can tell in a professional setting, it sometimes is really hard to just think of that on the fly, right? We're not just walking around thinking of great stories all the time. So if you don't have one off the top of your head, a way you can start thinking about what would be a good story is by mining your personal experiences. So think about moments in your life where you felt a really strong emotion. Any time that you feel that really strong emotion, there's probably some story there. And there's probably a story that you could tell in a really interesting, exciting way. So any type of emotion, whether it's happy or hopeful, or you're worried or frightened, you're inspired, you're getting really excited about something, even negative emotions, right? When you're angry or frustrated or embarrassed and ashamed, or even if you don't feel great, you feel sad, sometimes the best stories involve a really dark moment in your life that you worked your way out of, right? That's going to be one of the things that grabs people, because essentially great stories start with and end with emotional change. So if you're telling stories from the first person, you want to be clear about what changed about you, because that's going to grab people and help people stick to what the message is that you want to be telling. All right, so that's number 1. Thinking about your personal experiences, moments of high emotion. That's a great raw material to start thinking about what you can talk about. Next is how do you make it memorable. So we had a couple of volunteers here we were talking about earlier. What are reasons why storytelling helps stick in people's brains? And there's actually some science behind that. And I am not a neuroscientist. My cousin is. He's vetted these slides. But there's a couple of studies that are really helpful to think about why story is a terrific tool for sticking in the brains of an audience. So there are 2 brain chemicals, dopamine and oxytocin, that I want to talk about today. Has anyone here heard of dopamine? Yeah, raise your hand. Yeah, dopamine is a really important chemical in the brain. It sort of gives us the feeling of pleasure. And storytelling can unlock your brain or your audience's brain to release dopamine. And more specifically, when you're telling a really exciting story where there's a lot of action or there's really moments of high intensity or stress, that is linked with higher releases of dopamine. So think about if you're in a movie or watching a TV show and there's that cliffhanger moment where you lean forward in your chair, what's happening is your brain is releasing dopamine. That's what's being triggered there, and that's why you really want to keep watching, because it's pleasurable and it's fun and it's exciting. So we want our stories to have those moments. We want to have those cliffhanger moments because dopamine release is tied to memory. The more you can release dopamine in an audience's head, the more likely it is they're going to remember that story. That's what the research shows. The other chemical is oxytocin. Has anyone heard of this one? It's the lesser known, less exciting one. This one is more around establishing connection. So someone brought up earlier that stories help us empathize with the people around us. And when you're telling a story with someone, what happens is oxytocin is released in both brains. And that's the chemical that's tied to bonding and connection. So not only are you making it more likely that someone will remember what you have to say, you're also establishing a personal connection to someone at the same time. Really cool brain science. That's all the brain science I have for you today. But 2 things that are going on in the background while you're telling stories that help keep people engaged. The other thing that's really important, and this is going to get to when we start to actually practice telling stories, is the idea of having a controlling idea. This is the thesis statement, essentially. So every story has to have a point, right? Think about how many times you've listened to someone, maybe it's a friend, maybe it's a spouse, maybe it's a boss, just drone on and on and on, and the story just keeps going, and you're thinking, why? What are we even talking about right now? So a great story in a professional setting has a point. It has a controlling idea, and it has one controlling idea. And when you have that really clear, it makes it much simpler for you to make sure that every single element of the story that you're telling points back to that controlling idea. That way you don't get lost on weird tangents that don't matter and you lose folks, all right? So when we start practicing at the end of this workshop, you're gonna think about what's that one message you wanna get across. That's the controlling idea. All right, so we've gone 2 already. We're on a fast track here. So we're gonna get to our first exercise right now, which is around engaging the senses. So great stories engage the senses. So what are the senses? What are the senses that we think about when I say engage the senses? You can just shout them out.
Smell.
Smell, great one. Sight, taste. Touch, yeah, in the back, touch. Hearing, yeah. So these are all the 5 senses that a great story appeals to. And this may seem a little counterintuitive because we're thinking, well, I'm at work, why am I talking about all these senses, these sensory details? This isn't proving the point of why we should invest in certain projects or why a certain person has done well or why I believe that this argument is definitely a winner in a certain case. The thing about senses is these are what stick in people's brains. The more you can appeal to sensory details, the more you'll transport your audience to the time and the place that you want to bring them to. So if you use a lot of sensory details, you talk about what the color looked like on the car as you stepped into it for the first time after you got your driver's license, or you talk about the sound your high heels made as you walked into the interview room, or the smell of the burning hot dogs in the stands as you worked your first job at a ballpark. These kind of details are really helpful and, again, bring people into you and bring that empathy out because they've been there, they've experienced these sensory details. They're also really good metaphorically, right? You don't have to actually talk about what the room tasted like, right? If you're in an interview or in a pitch meeting, right? You can use it metaphorically. I can taste how close we were to winning this work. Or I could smell how nervous the candidate was as they were getting ready to interview, right? These are all things that illustrate and highlight what we want to bring the audience in to feel. There's one more sense, a 6th sense, non-ghost category, that's really helpful for telling stories, and that's the thinking mind. This is especially helpful when you're telling stories in a professional setting where you want to bring people in to think about what were you thinking while this thing was happening. It's another way to get people to be transported into your brain. It's really especially helpful if you're talking about things that happened in the past when maybe you approached things differently, like as a child or a teenager. What were you thinking? That's a sense, that's a sensory detail that people can identify with. Okay, so let's practice this, shall we? There's a great exercise I like to do, and we're just gonna take about 4 minutes. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna find a partner, so someone who's next to you. If you don't know them, introduce yourself. This is a conference, we can network, we can even exchange business cards, who knows what can happen. So you're gonna find someone next to you, introduce yourself, and you're each going to think of a place you loved to visit as a child. It could be anywhere you loved to go to. It could be school, it could be grandma's house, it could be literally anywhere, the park. And I'm gonna give you about 2 minutes each to describe that place. And I want you to use as many sensory details as possible. Don't worry about telling a story. Don't worry about having a plot or characters or anything like that. I just want you to practice using descriptive words about a place that you really love to visit, all right? So I'll call out 2 minutes so that you make sure each person gets about 2 minutes to describe this place, and then we're gonna come back together. Does that make sense? Can we give that a shot? All right, so turn to your partner, pick who wants to start. I'm gonna put 4 minutes on the clock. Each have 2 minutes. Go for it. That's 2 minutes, so switch partners if you haven't already done so. Just move it quickly. That's about 4 minutes, so let's come back together. Let's come back together. All right. So, how was that? How'd that go? It's good? Everyone's able to do it. Good. Anyone have any like very visceral sensory moments that they enjoyed? Yeah. Okay. Cool. So typically I'll have some time for people to share, but I want to keep moving because we have a very short session today. But what I really want to highlight with those sensory descriptions is it's something that you don't want to cut out of your story. These little details are the things that will stick in people's brains, right? They're probably going to forget the fact or the data point or one thing coming before the other plot-wise, but they're not going to forget what it felt like as you're describing, what your grandmother's house smelled like when she was making pancakes. I was listening to someone over there earlier, or what you were thinking as a little leaguer when you stepped up to plate. So these are little things that often get swept aside. Try to pepper them in. I can't stress that enough. All right, let's keep going. So we've talked about 3 tools that we can use already when we're talking about telling really great stories in professional settings. The third thing, and this is a small thing, but it's important, you want to balance the amount of time you spend in narrative description and in scenic description. So what I mean by that is just narrative description is what happened next. That's plot, right? This happened, then this happened, then this happened. And then there's also scenic elements. That's what we just practiced. That's describing the room. That's describing your grandmother. That's describing your best friend, Stephen. There's no best friend, Stephen. I have one, but you don't have to have one. So there should be a balance. Just like a great story or a great movie or a great book, it's not all plot, 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 and it's not all character descriptions where people are just staring at each other in a room, right? You just want to have a balance of both of those to keep things moving while also bringing people in to take a moment and reflect on the scene, right? Pretty straightforward. So in order to do that, we have a great tool that I call the story spine. Because a lot of what people struggle with in storytelling is keeping it to a structure. And what I'm going to show you right now is a really simple structure that is essentially like a checklist. That if you fill in the blanks, you're going to tell a story that makes sense. It has a beginning, a middle, end. Things lead up to a climax, and it'll keep you on track, right? So that's what we're going to work on next. So this is called the story spine. And it's a tool, it's a great tool that was invented by a guy named Ken Adams. So if you want to Google him, he's got great exercises on this. But essentially, every story in history follows this same structure. Maybe some of you are familiar with the hero's journey or other different types of storytelling structures that are very similar to this one. This is as pared down and simple as it gets. So every story starts with once upon a time. And essentially what you're doing here is you're setting the stage about what the world was like before the story started, right? Maybe this is talking about what school was like, or what the office was like, or what going to a client every day felt like, right? So this is essentially, what was the world like before the story started? Second is every day. So this is what you were like. So you want to tell us, what were you like before this story started? What did you feel? What were you thinking? What were you worried about, right? And it's going to be different for every single story, but you kind of want to set a context. What was the world like around you, and what were you like? But one day, so this is where things get interesting. This is what's called the inciting incident in a lot of stories or novels, but essentially something changes, right? Something in this world, this beautiful little world or terrible world, depending on the story, something changes. Maybe you discover a brand new book, or you meet a guy, or you discover a love of biology as a high schooler. Whatever it is, something changes, okay? Because of that, something happens. Because of that, something else happens. Because of that, another thing happens. Okay, so this is where the plot thickens. This is where one thing leads to another, leads to another. This is where your story's picking up pace, okay? This is often where people get lost because they add so many details that don't really come one to the next, So all these things should be causal. One thing leads to another, until finally, this is the climax, right? This is the big moment where you face down your boss and you ask for that raise, or you stand up to the bully, or you ask her to marry you, okay? Whatever that is, whatever that climax is, this is where everything was leading. And ever since then, this is what was resolved. Okay, so from the climax, what changed? And this is where that emotional change happens. I talked earlier about great stories having a big emotional change. This can be where that happens. This could be where you and your team discover a brand new process that's really helpful, or you get that really terrible director on board with your project. Whatever it is, this is what changed. This is the aha moment. And then the end. So if it wasn't clear from the telling of the story, you can really hit your audience over the head with that controlling idea here at the end. So this is why it's really important to have that controlling idea or that message, right? It both drives us to that climax and shows us why that message was revealed or became true in that climax moment. But also at the end, a lot of times people aren't paying attention, so you can just say, and that's why we always fill out our reports. It's like, and that's why you have to renew your license and registration every year. So whatever that controlling idea is that you want to be really clear to your audience, because remember, we're telling a story to prove a point to an audience in a professional setting. You can just say it. Just say it here at the end so they know why that story made sense. Okay, does that make sense? This is really simple. It's really simple, plug and play, you just fill in the blanks. We're gonna practice using it right now so we can get a chance to give you a shot at coming up with a story that you might wanna tell at work or potentially with friends. So we're just gonna practice telling really concise, tight stories. So here's how it's gonna work, all right? I'm gonna have you find a partner. It could be the same partner that you were just working with. And you're gonna use the story spine. I'm gonna put it right back up on the screen. And you're gonna plug in a story from your life, a true story, into this spine and practice telling it, all right? So cutting out all fat and getting it going straight to the climax. And we may have some time for some folks to come up here and share. We may have time for like one or two. But what I'll do is I'm gonna put about 5 minutes on the clock. So each person's gonna have a little over 2 minutes, so we'll go quickly. All right, does that make sense? Yeah? Okay, so find a partner. We have 5 minutes to tell each of you gets to tell one story, and here's the story spine you can use to practice. Okay, if you haven't yet gotten to partner 2, make sure the second person gets a chance to share.
I didn't. So you put a different business unit in the group that I supported. So it was very weird community. So my boss was surprised, but we got past that. He still works for that company, and I worked there for almost 5 years.
One more minute.
7 different countries. PR, payroll, and any of the programs that were developed in San Diego, I was involved with that region there. There's about 50, maybe 120 students. So I took lessons with him there, and then his family and my own family tried to teach me as well. Once we found out we were moving back, because we relocated back here, and then I kind of stopped practicing. But I wish I kept going, so I need a fresh one.
All right, let's come back together. Let's come back together. So finish up your story. We're going to come back together as a group. All right. So I was walking around and I heard some snippets of some phenomenal stories. And in my workshops, I don't play videos or songs or anything. I have you be the entertainment, which is often way more interesting than any sort of video I could put together. So is there anyone who would like to share their story in front of a room full of brand new colleagues? And it's a little intimidating, but I always do this and it's always phenomenal to hear. We have time for at least one person to share if there is someone who wants to volunteer, sort of vamping right now as someone can get the courage up to share. If not, we can move on, but I want to give someone an opportunity if they really want to share in front of the group, because there's some really good ones out there.
I'll do it.
Yes, yeah, do you want to come to the mic? Or you're loud.
I'm loud?
You're loud, I'm hoping you're loud.
So, how I got into human resources many years ago. I'm in my last job now, so I have lots of stories, but this is how I got into human resources. I was in a difficult marriage, and I could see it kind of going down the tubes. I have 2 little kids, and I needed to get out of the house and prepare myself. So I had no college at that point, very little. And I had a beautiful local hospital very close to my house, and I saw where they needed a receptionist. And I went down there. That's back when you could go apply at the window and do an app. So I did that. And I just fell in love with that place. It was a Catholic hospital. They had this big picture window that looked out into a rose garden and these beautiful yellow curtains. And I just saw myself sitting there. And that was back when you could call and check on your application, which I did every day. And the recruiter finally got so frustrated with me that she said, fine, come in today at 2 o'clock. And I actually said, fine, I'll be there. I went in, I had the interview. That's back when they would hire you on the spot. And I got hired, and that was it. I did really, really well. I loved it, and I've loved it ever since, for 40 years.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing. What's your name?
Sharon.
Sharon. Thank you so much for sharing. So that was a phenomenal example of exactly why you would want to have that story ready to go. And you used a lot of the tools of this to talk about, well, I'll ask the group. what's the scenario where she might want to tell that story? Where might that be useful to have that ready to go to prove a point? Because I can think of a couple of different controlling ideas that are useful lessons in that story.
Right here.
Yeah, right here. Say that. Yeah, right here. Yeah, exactly. Literally today in this conference. Why'd you get into HR? I'm sure so many people have told that story today already, their own versions. So having that really well practiced and some of those little examples, kind of funny moments where that was back when you could call, or I kept hounding them. That's a great message around being persistent. You can tell that to a candidate if you're working in talent and all that. So really phenomenal example of why you might want to have a story with a controlling idea. Anyone else want to go? That was a great first start. Otherwise, we'll just kind of wrap up and make sure that we cover everything again. Okay, cool. Well, thank you again for sharing. It's brave to go up in front of a room of people you don't know at a conference room this big, so I appreciate it. So I want to pause and see if there's any questions. I'm going to have some time out here in front if people want to come up one-on-one and ask me some questions. But are there any questions before we kind of wrap things up and I give you some just kind of last tips before I get you to lunch? Yeah.
Other than like training setting, where else do you recommend that people use this tactic?
Yeah, so I think networking is a great point in time to have these personal stories. I think anytime you are trying to make a case for something in a presentation setting or a boardroom type setting or even in a small group setting, using personal stories, using personal anecdotes as evidence for why certain behaviors are useful or certain things are a best practice or certain lessons learned. You can illustrate a lesson learned in your own life as to why you may want to encourage someone to take on a certain behavior. Really useful for mentoring or anytime you're managing someone to kind of illustrate points to someone that may be younger than you or less experienced than you. Like, here's some examples of things I've learned in my career that might be useful for you to know, and they're going to remember it much more if you tell them a story, especially even if it's an embarrassing story about why you shouldn't make the same mistakes that I do. So those are kind of a bunch of different examples, like with personal stories. Having these ready to go can be really useful. Yeah?
Do you have any other opening storylines besides Once Upon a Time?
Yeah, it's a great point. So this framework is a little bit, I would say static, right? You don't have to say once upon a time. You could say, back in last year, I was feeling this way about my job, or in the 90s, we always did this. So the idea is you can use a phrase there that's setting the stage for what things were like around you. What was the world like, regardless of, once upon a time is kind of old-timey, but that's the point. Good question, though. Awesome. Any other questions? Cool. All right, well, let's wrap things up and get you out of here. So there are basically a couple things that you want to keep in mind before you tell a story when you're coming up with stories that you may want to tell in professional settings. So reclaim the past, okay? You experience these things. It's up to you how you want to recontextualize the moments that happened in your life. So if it was really embarrassing, you can reclaim that moment as a triumphant moment outside of that embarrassing moment. So it's up to you to provide that context, which is why you're telling personal stories, because they are emotional. Telling things from the first person is the most effective way to create that empathy and create that bond. Define the change. Make it really clear in your story what changed, okay? Don't just tell the story and have the audience leave going, well, why did you tell that story? What was different about you before and after? Make it really, really clear what changed. Was it you that changed? Was it your team that changed? Was it the company that changed? Change is what we're trying to show here rather than tell. Go deeper, okay? Even if it's an embarrassing moment, the moment is past, okay? Some of the best, most effective stories are when you reveal a whole lot about yourself and reveal it potentially in an embarrassing way. So the more you can bring an audience along with how things got tough and how things were difficult for you, the more exciting it'll be when you get out of that in your story. You show how you triumphant and you fixed things around you. Perspective, really important. So like we had a question here earlier, it doesn't have to necessarily be once upon a time, but the point is to share what changed in the world. So give a little perspective, zoom out. If you're just talking about things that you and your family did, how did that affect the people around you? How did it affect the larger world? The more you can zoom out and give that context, the more powerful that story is going to be. And I can't stress this enough. Have a clear, controlling idea. Make the point, the moral clear, because that's going to be the driving anchor of your story. If you don't know why you're telling the story, I guarantee you the audience won't know why they're hearing this story. So define this first. What's the point? Like we had in our story here earlier, just talking about this is how I got into HR. That's a point enough. That's controlling idea enough. You can get into even more specific things like, this is why following up on a job is a great best practice, or why you always want to be due diligent and use all the resources available to get in contact with decision makers. Those can be more specific too, but make sure you know what that controlling idea is. And practice. Practice. That's why in this workshop, we only have 40 minutes or so to do this, but the only way you're going to get better at telling these stories is by practicing. So practice when you're in the car on the way to work. Practice in the shower. Practice telling these stories to your friends or colleagues or coworkers, your spouse. Practice telling these stories, get feedback from people about what worked, what doesn't work, and that's how you're going to become a good storyteller. You don't have to necessarily get up on stage and tell a story in front of 100 people to get good at storytelling, but you do have to practice. You have to practice saying the words and feeling how it feels to put together beginning, middle, and end to things that happen to you in your life. So I want to thank you all for being here. I know this is a little different. It's a little bit more of a workshop, interactive. Hopefully you made some new friends, learned some things. If you want the slides, or if you want to learn more about some of the workshops I offer, check out oakenreads.com/HRstar. There's downloadable links to get the slides from today. I'm also going to be doing another workshop on a totally different soft skills topic later this afternoon on interviewing skills. So tools for helping the people in your company become better interviewers. How to ask better questions, ask follow-up questions, listen for good examples, and all that. So that'll be at the end of the day today. So thanks so much for being here. Good luck with lunch. It's way off. And have a great rest of your day. Oh, thank you. Well, if you're thinking about that stuff, you should come this afternoon, because the first part of the interview thing is about identifying values. That's something I coach people a lot. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's great because it's